Okay, let's set the scene. Imagine it's June 25th, 1975. India. Normally buzzing, right? Full of debate, democratic energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Vibrant.
But on this day, the air is just thick. There's this quiet tension. And then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declares a state of emergency.
A huge moment. A shockwave, really.
Exactly. It effectively suspends India's democracy for 21 long months. It wasn't just, a policy shift. It felt like a rupture,
A fundamental break.
a really pivotal, critical moment in the country's journey. And the ripples, we still feel them now, almost 50 years on.
Definitely.
So as we get close to June 25th, 2025, which, many people now call Samvidhaan Hatya Diwas.
A day of constitutional assassination. A powerful term.
It really is. It's the stark reminder, isn't it, how fragile democracy can actually be. So our mission today really is to deep dive into this period.
Yeah, to really understand it.
And pull out the crucial lessons, the ones that still hit home today. We've been digging through the history, the analyses, and three big vulnerabilities sort of jump out from the emergency. First, this ongoing challenge of dynastic politics. Second, the whole issue of internal party democracy, or the lack of it.
A really critical point, that one.
And finally, the role, sometimes the failure, honestly, of intellectuals and the media.
Yeah, the so-called Fourth Estate. But, amidst all that darkness, we also found something, well, surprising. A more positive thread, maybe less talked about.
Oh, what's that?
The pretty incredible resistance that came from certain civil society groups. It shows a kind of resilience, even when things looked bleakest. A counter story, almost.
Okay, interesting. So let's unpack all of this then. What did those 21 months really tell us about how democracies get tested? And crucially, what can we learn now to protect them?
Right. Let's really paint the picture of those dark days. June 25th, 1975, the Prime Minister's declaration comes down, spreads like wildfire.
Instantly changes everything.
The immediate results were just devastating. Civil liberties, gone, suspended just like that.
The basic freedoms people took for granted. Then mass arrests. Opposition leaders, key figures, people who'd been central to public life, suddenly jailed. No trial.
Swept up overnight, many of them.
And the press, supposedly the watchdog, right? Hit with heavy censorship. Really heavy.
Yeah, I mean, you literally had newspapers coming out with blank columns where editorials should have been.
Exactly. A visible sign of the silence being forced on them. And this went on for 21 months, until March 21st, 1977. An atmosphere of fear, suppressed freedom, the whole constitutional setup distorted.
A state of paralysis in many ways.
And now, nearly 50 years later, it's just so vital we remember this. It wasn't a blip. It was a deep scar on India's democratic story.
It really was. And what's so illuminating looking back at the accounts is just how fast it happened. How quickly institutions can be, well, hollowed out when the checks and balances disappear or get weakened.
It happened incredibly fast.
Yeah, and that's the stark reminder, isn't it? Not just for India, but for any democracy. It shows how easily democratic norms can just erode from the inside.
Right. It wasn't an external look back.
No, exactly. It shows that vigilance isn't just some nice idea. It's like an active, ongoing job. When the people meant to uphold the system fail, or worse, deliberately undermine it, the whole thing becomes incredibly vulnerable.
You could see it happening. The judiciary pressured, parliament sidelined.
The bureaucracy manipulated. It's a classic playbook, unfortunately. And it shows how an internal breakdown can be way more dangerous, maybe, than an outside threat.
That vulnerability you mentioned, that internal weakness,
Yeah.
it leads us straight to the first big lesson, the danger of dynastic politics.
Ah, yes. Always a relevant topic in India.
And we're not just talking about, someone's son or daughter getting into politics. It's more structural, isn't it? Where
Right.
power, authority, even party leadership just gets passed down within families, inherited almost.
Like an heirloom.
And this was glaring during the emergency, especially with Indira Gandhi relying so heavily on her son, Sanjay Gandhi.
The extra constitutional authority, as it was called.
Exactly. What's chilling is Sanjay held no elected office, none. Yet he had this enormous unchecked power.
Making huge decisions. Running things.
Yeah, shaping policy, pushing coercive programs like forced sterilizations, all operating outside any real democratic accountability.
That's precisely it. And if you zoom out, it begs that big question for any democracy, right?
Yeah.
How do you make sure leadership is actually earned, not just inherited?
Good question.
The real insight from the emergency isn't just, oh, dynastic power blocks new ideas, which it does, but how its concentration within one family with no checks, no internal party challenge, can just dismantle democratic safeguards so quickly.
Because there's no pushback.
Right. If you're basically guaranteed your spot because of your name, what's the real incentive to, innovate?
Right.
Or build in genuine support, or even just work hard?
It fosters that sense of entitlement.
Totally. Power becomes like personal property, not a public trust, and we saw the results during the emergency. Inefficiency, zero accountability, probably corruption too. It just erodes public faith.
And for ordinary people.
It makes politics look like this closed shop,
Yeah.
a game for a few powerful families, not something that represents them or where talent actually matters.
And it's fascinating, or maybe worrying, how this trend just keeps going in India today in different ways.
Still very much present.
Our research threw up so many examples across the board, really.
Yeah.
The Thackeray's in Maharashtra, the Stalins down in Tamil Nadu, the Abdullahs in Jammu and Kashmir, the Yadavs in UP and Bihar. The list goes on.
Well-known political families.
And look, some dynasts might be popular, they might even be good at the job, but the pattern itself, the analysis suggests, it can really undermine meritocracy. It potentially sidelines talented people who just don't have the famous surname.
True merit gets overlooked.
Though there are nuances too, right? We saw, for instance, that dynasts in opposition parties sometimes lose elections, maybe the public pushing back.
Sometimes, yes. There's some accountability there.
Whereas those inside the big ruling parties, maybe like the BJT currently, seem a bit more secure. It adds complexity.
It does. And that complexity just highlights why we need clear solutions. A really crucial reform here would be for parties themselves to adopt, like genuinely transparent, merit-based ways of choosing candidates.
So moving away from backroom deals based on family ties.
Exactly. Towards a system with real internal party democracy. Proper elections within the party, where qualifications, service, leadership potential with crime, those are the things that matter, not just your last name, creating a level playing field inside the parties.
Which brings us neatly to lesson number 2, that very lack of internal party democracy.
Yeah, this was huge during the emergency.
The Congress Party at the time, despite its history as this big democratic movement, there was virtually no internal dissent against Indira Gandhi's decisions.
Shockingly little, according to the records.
Our sources point to this stark absence of internal checks. It just allowed authoritarianism to grow unchecked within the party itself. Big decisions made by a tiny inner circle.
With no real consultation or challenge from below.
Yeah.
And that internal democracy, it's just so vital, isn't it? For accountability, for new ideas, for making sure the party actually represents its members and the wider public.
Otherwise, it just becomes top-down.
Exactly. Parties become these closed structures, like private clubs almost. It blocks new talent, new perspectives, different voices. We've seen it happen again and again in India's history, right?
Yeah.
Well, think about Sharad Pawar forming the NCP, or Mamata Banerjee creating the TMC. Part of that story was about internal issues, wasn't it? A feeling that there wasn't enough democratic space within their old parties.
Right. Splits often happen over that.
So it really raises the question, how do you empower the actual party members? Give them a real say, ensure a healthier system where, disagreement is actually seen as a strength, not a sign of disloyalty.
And the worrying thing is how relevant this still feels today. So many parties in India still seem to run like fiefdoms, don't they?
Yeah.
Highly centralized leaders, very little input from the grassroots.
That top-down model persists.
In fact, even a law that was meant to stabilize things, the 52nd Amendment, the anti-defection law from 1985.
Ah, yes. Controversial.
It gets a lot of criticism for actually stifling internal dissent. The idea was to stop politicians switching parties all the time.
To stop horse trading.
Right. But it forces elected MPs and MLAs to vote strictly along the party line. If they don't, they can lose their seat.
Which effectively means party members can become just rubber stamps for the leadership, right?
Yeah.
It limits real debate inside the legislature.
Kids.
Diverse viewpoints.
Exactly. So the way forward here needs concrete steps, fundamental changes. Parties absolutely have to hold regular, transparent internal elections for all leadership positions, from the local level right up to the top.
Make it genuinely democratic internally.
Yes. And, our analysis suggests there's even a growing case for independent bodies, maybe the Election Commission, to actually enforce these norms.
Oh, that would be a big step. Huge. Potentially revolutionary. But it might be what's needed to make parties truly live up to the democratic ideals they talk about publicly. Turn them from these top-down outfits into genuinely member-driven organizations.
Okay, let's shift focus. Lesson 3. And this is quite sobering, actually. The failure of intellectuals in the media during the emergency.
A really crucial pillar that buckled.
During those 21 months, what the sources show is pretty disheartening. Many intellectuals, many media outlets, even big names you'd expect to be independent voices, they were either silent,
Conspicuously silent.
or in some cases actively supported the government's actions. They just failed, by and large, to challenge that massive government overreach.
There's that famous quote, wasn't there, about the press being asked to bend, but choosing to crawl.
That's the one. L.K. Advani said that after the emergency. The pressure was intense, no doubt. But the collective failure to resist was, well, profound.
And it wasn't just self-censorship.
No, absolutely not. There was direct, brutal censorship. Newspaper offices raided, journalists arrested, often on flimsy pretexts or none at all.
Creating a climate of fear. And the consequence of that silence, that widespread compliance, was immediate and devastating. It basically gave the government a free pass to act oppressively.
With no pushback from that vital fourth pillar.
Exactly. When the watchdogs are muzzled, or worse, choose not to bark, authoritarianism can just run rampant. That period drove home just how essential a vigilant, independent media really is for a healthy democracy.
Question to scrutinize.
To hold power accountable, no matter how uncomfortable or risky it might be.
And looking at today's media landscape, okay, it's definitely stronger in some ways, right? More diverse, more channels, digital platform.
For sure, it's a different world in 1975.
But the challenges haven't disappeared, have they? We still see political influence, maybe more subtle intimidation sometimes, and this huge problem of misinformation, disinformation.
Especially amplified by social media.
Yeah, it makes it really hard for the public to figure out what's true, makes critical thinking even more important, but also harder. So that core lesson from the emergency, still incredibly relevant.
Absolutely. The lesson is crystal clear, and it doesn't fade. We have an unwavering, absolute need for a truly vigilant, truly independent media. And for courageous intellectuals. People willing to speak truth to power.
Even when it's unpopular.
Especially when it's unpopular or dangerous. That's their crucial role. To question, scrutinize, hold power accountable. It's a vital check against government overreach.
Okay, so we've talked about dynastic politics, lack of internal democracy, media failures. But amidst all that, you mentioned a counter-narrative earlier.
Ah, yes. The resistance part.
Specifically, the role played by the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, which is fascinating because they were actually banned, right, pretty quickly after the emergency started.
Yes, banned on July 4th, 1975, just days in. And their chief at the time, Balasaheb Diwas, was arrested along with thousands and thousands of their members. And this is what's quite striking, this less discussed aspect of the resistance, particularly given, the RSS's complex history and the debates around its ideology.
Right, that's not often highlighted in this context.
No. And while some accounts, some viewpoints, do raise questions about their stance, maybe alleged initial outreach attempts or broader ideology, the evidence we've looked at, including reports from international media back then, like The Economist in '76,
Yeah.
it overwhelmingly points to active, organized resistance.
Yeah.
Despite the ban, despite the arrests, they set up underground networks. They published secret pamphlets and newsletters to counter the government propaganda.
Really going underground.
Coordinated significant nonviolent protests and acts of defiance.
Yeah.
The numbers are staggering. Reportedly, over 100,000 RSS volunteers were jailed during the emergency.
100,000, that's
Yeah.
massive.
It indicates a huge, sustained effort against the emergency. And this specific story, I think, really highlights how vital civil society resistance can be from all sorts of groups across different ideologies.
When the formal institutions fail.
Exactly. When those falter or get compromised, it shows that the drive for freedom can emerge from, unexpected places sometimes. It tells you that resistance isn't monolithic.
So as we look ahead to this 50th anniversary, June 25th, 2025, what does all this mean for us today? These lessons seem so alive, don't they?
They really do.
The dangers of dynastic politics, the absolute need for democracy within parties, not just between them, and the critical role of a free, watchful media. These aren't just historical footnotes.
Not at all. They're ongoing challenges, not just for India, but really for any democracy trying to navigate the complexities of the 21st century. And if we want to really strengthen democracy, make it resilient against these kinds of tests in the future, we need tangible reforms, systemic ones. Well, transparent, genuinely democratic elections within political parties, that's fundamental, making sure leadership is earned, representative, and an absolute unwavering commitment to a free, fearless press. A press that can operate without interference, without fear, without favor, holding that mirror up to power.
And the RSS story you mentioned?
Yeah, I think the story of their resistance during the emergency, whatever your wider views of the organization might be, it serves as this powerful reminder. Vigilance from civil society is crucial.
From ordinary people.
From ordinary citizens, from independent groups, from every corner of society. It tells us that the ultimate safeguard of democracy isn't just the institutions on paper. It's the active, courageous participation of the people themselves.
So reflecting on all this, these moments from India's past, it really makes you think, doesn't it? What are the warning signs we might be missing today? The hidden signs of democratic fragility, maybe right under our noses.
In our own societies, yeah.
And maybe even more importantly, what role do you as an individual play in protecting those foundations, in safeguarding freedom? Something to really ponder.